Okay, so we are recording. Guys, thank you very much for coming along to hear what Annika has to talk about. Annika is going to take most of the control of the conversation here anyway. Um, so we're going to have a bit of a Q&A. So if there's any questions that you have, we'll put them into the chat. Yeah, and if everyone knows how to do that, it should be along the bottom of your screen. You might need to go into the more function on Zoom. But any questions that you have during it, please just type them in there and we'll address them as we go along. Does that sound okay, Annika?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, if what I'm going to do is we'll kind of break up the conversation. We'll cover a topic, and then I'll kind of go out of presenter mode, and we can have a bit of a chat about it then, so that when you guys have questions fresh in your mind, we can just discuss it right there. And we're a relatively smaller group today, so it's up to yourselves. If you want to throw it in the chat box, that's great. Or if you want to just throw up your hand and speak it out, that's also totally works as well. So whatever suits. Cool. So yeah, I guess I'll just introduce myself here quickly and then we can dive in. So my name is Annika, and I work as a sport and exercise psychology consultant. And I know Stephen through a sort of mutual connection through Black Box. And so we've been chatting about this stuff for a little while, and we came up with the idea that it'd be really fun to do a bit of a talk for all of you to share some ideas and some knowledge, and then also give you a chance to ask any questions. So my background is specifically in psychology. I have an undergraduate in psychology and then a master's in sport and exercise psychology, which I actually got in Belfast. And so I lived in Belfast for about a year and a half while I was studying for that, and then just recently moved down to Dublin, where I have been spending the last, I suppose, 3 or 4 months getting settled in here. So if you have any questions more specifically about me, don't hesitate to ask. But aside from that brief introduction, I will just get on to the good stuff now. Okay, so we kind of talked today about what are the key concepts that we want to zero in on, and when we're talking about sort of an introduction or laying a foundation of skills for exercise or sports or performance psychology. So I think what often happens is that we get these little tidbits of information. You know, there's a lot of stuff flying around on Instagram, posts with, inspirational quotes or little chunks of ideas that may really resonate with us, but it can be challenging to figure out how to take all that information and actually apply it to a system that is going to actually create some changes for you in the way that you think about yourself, the way that you approach the mental side of your performance, and all the little bits and pieces of that, like habit change and motivation and confidence, and how it all comes together into sort of one package of a successful experience. So what we want to give you guys today is a start at sort of that foundational knowledge and sense of structure and system that you can take forward and sort of plug in all the little bits of knowledge that you may acquire moving forward into an overall system that you feel more comfortable with and understand. So that's our goal. So along those lines, we're going to start out today with one of my absolute favorite topics, which is mindset. So I'm going to pull up some slides here to kind of give you guys a little double bit of content. So you can hear me talking, but you've also got a little bit of a visual. Forgive me while I fumble around with this for a second. Okay, so when we're talking about mindset, I'm going to just sort of get into what it is, and then we're going to talk about the two sides of the coin with mindset, the mindset we want and the mindset we don't want. And then we're going to talk about how to actually influence that in ourselves. And then we'll take a little break and you guys can fire some questions at me and we'll get into it on a more personal level. So I always like to throw a little quote in at the beginning of things to get us thinking along the right lines. So this is one of my favorites by Abraham Maslow. What's necessary to change a person is to change his awareness of himself. So I think what that's really telling us is that in order to really change how we do something or how we behave or how we act or how we're motivated, we first need to figure out and understand ourselves a little bit. We need to develop our self-awareness and start to really realize how our thoughts and our beliefs are influencing our behaviors, so that we can create real lasting change. So mindset is one of the coolest concepts out there, I think, because it gives us a really clear understanding, a really clear framework from which to really understand how our beliefs can actually impact the way that we think and behave and ultimately act. And that those impacts can have really far-reaching effects with regards to our success and our ability to be successful at something in the long run. So a mindset in itself is actually a set of beliefs. So a belief, to take one step further back there, is an idea that we form about ourselves. They usually start when we're quite young, and that idea is then solidified over time through multiple experiences and multiple sources of feedback, until that idea has like really solidified into something that we think is 100% true about ourselves. So we call these things core beliefs, and they really make up the structure of our own self-identity. So as an example for this, imagine someone quite young, doesn't really have a good time in their gym class, and they sort of have this sense that they're not keeping up with the other kids, and they get this idea maybe that they're not really athletic or they're not really sporty. And then that idea becomes or strengthened over time, because maybe they don't get great feedback from their gym teachers. Maybe the gym teachers tell their parents that, yeah, your kid's having a bit of a hard time, they're struggling here, they don't seem to be that fit. Maybe they get feedback from their peers where in the form of being teased, or maybe they don't get picked for the team sports until the end. And all of these experiences start to solidify this idea that this person has about themselves, that they're not athletic or they're not sporty. And then you can see how that can have a compounding effect throughout your life. So now that that person believes that they're not sporty, they're going to avoid situations that require them to be athletic and sporty, right? Because they've already decided that they're not good at those things. And therefore, they're not going to get any sportier or more athletic, because they're avoiding all the situations that would allow them to develop those skills. And so as time moves on, this idea of themselves as being non-athletic and non-sporty compounds. By the time they're an adult, this can be a deeply held belief. And maybe at that point, this person who's now an adult is struggling with their fitness and their health, and they want to be healthy, they want to get fit, but deep down, they have this core belief that they're not a sporty or a fit person. And so we then find this direct conflict between what that person wants and what that person actually deep down believes. And what's really interesting about this scenario that I just outlined there is that this person may or may not actually be aware of the fact that they have a belief about themselves. And so you can start to see how these beliefs and interpretations and thoughts about ourselves have this kind of layering and ripple effect throughout our lives, and can directly impact situations in the present. Okay, so if you're still with me, we're gonna talk now about how all that applies to this concept of mindset. So mindset is basically a way of understanding all this stuff about beliefs, which can be a little bit complicated. It gives us a really cool, clear structure from which to approach it and understand it. So if we think of a mindset of a set of beliefs, then we can sort of identify two common mindsets in people. And so the first one is a growth mindset. And the belief that underlines this growth mindset is that you can basically get better at anything. You can improve at anything, any skill, any ability, any talent, as long as you are willing to apply effort and hard work and time. Okay, so this may seem like a simple belief, but it has really, really far-reaching consequences. And it's really essential for success. So the other side of the coin now is what we would call a fixed mindset. And this mindset is underlined by the belief that you're only born with so much potential in one area. So this someone with a fixed mindset around sport would really believe that because of their genetics, maybe their parents aren't sporty, maybe, you know, through their experiences, they just don't see themselves as a sporty person. They believe that it doesn't really matter how hard they work at becoming more sporty or more athletic. They're only ever going to get to a certain point. And when they get to that point, there's no progress possible for them past that point. And so they don't believe that effort actually results in improvement. So in this case, the effort is seen as sort of useless. Okay, so these are kind of the foundational beliefs that underlie those two mindsets. So we'll dive into the two a bit more to help you guys get a bigger understanding of how these two mindsets impact the way that we think and perceive the world. Okay, so flipping back to the growth mindset again. If we have a growth mindset and we believe that we can improve at anything as long as we work hard at it, then we see failure as an opportunity to learn some sort of key bit of information about what we need to focus on to improve. So if I have a growth mindset and I fail at something, it doesn't mean that the failure is easy or that I laugh it off. It still might be a really difficult experience. But ultimately, I'm going to look at that failure and I'm going to say, what did that teach me? What did that show me that I can now take that knowledge and go away and apply time and apply effort and apply hard work and therefore improve and come back to that same situation and succeed the next time. So we see that there's a direct link with the growth mindset between applying effort and ultimately getting the results and the mastery that you want. As a result of this, people with a growth mindset tend to look at people who are better at them in whatever the skill set that they're trying to improve in. And they tend to find inspiration from those people because they see them as direct proof or evidence that the progress and the improvement is possible. And likewise with challenge, they see the challenge as sort of a source for opportunity. Whenever they can put themselves in a situation where they are challenged, they realize that experiencing the challenge is going to, once again, show them where their weaknesses are and where therefore they can work to improve and ultimately achieve that mastery. Okay, so flipping back over to the fixed mindset then, it's a very different story. Someone with a fixed mindset sees failure as a disaster because the failure for them, all that's doing is it's embarrassing them. It's exposing their weaknesses. It is showing everyone around them that they're not good. And they don't see effort as resulting in anything because they have this idea that they can only be so good at something. The effort itself is futile. And so people with a fixed mindset often avoid challenges, and they often feel intimidated by people who are further ahead in the progress, journey than them, because they just see those people as a reminder of what they feel they can never achieve. So you can see that those two underlying beliefs then have these ripple effects out into a very different experience of what may be the same situation. So you could have two people facing the exact same challenge, and they could have two completely different reactions, interpretations of that challenge based on their belief system and therefore their mindset. And so we see that this concept, whether someone has a growth or a fixed mindset, is absolutely pivotal across performance. Because as anyone knows who pushes themselves out of their comfort zone regularly and tries to improve at something, it's never a smooth journey. There's loads and loads of bumps on the road, and we encounter things like failure and effort and challenge all the time. And so the way that we react to those things is critical. So just before we open up now to some questions about mindset, these are some examples of what a growth mindset belief that would kind of fuel this growth mindset. So believing that you're creative, that you can find solutions to problems, okay? Believing in your own ability to adapt to challenges, to tap into your own resilience and learn from challenging situations, adapt and come back with a new strategy or a new perspective. believing that you can benefit from asking for help, that you can learn from other people, and that other people can ultimately aid you on your path towards mastery. Believing that you have the capacity to help other people. Believing that failure is difficult, but that the experience of failure is always going to give you an opportunity to improve yourself, and that challenges in themselves are always opportunity for growth. And again, it's important to highlight here that mindset is not just applying a kind of blind screen of positivity to life. It's not about saying, it's fine, we can grow from everything, you know, and trying to not feel the challenge and the heartache and the sometimes just like the sheer misery of failure, and sort of just trying to plow your way through it and force yourself into a positive frame of mind. So it's not so much about positivity as it is looking for the opportunity to grow or change. And so I think it's really important to highlight that, because it can feel disingenuous to people to sort of, when they feel like they're just supposed to find a positive spin for everything, because sometimes you can't, sometimes there isn't a positive spin. But there is always an opportunity to learn, even if the lesson is a pretty hard, difficult, frustrating lesson and there's little sense of positivity in it in the moment. There is always an opportunity to learn something. So that really for me is a kind of the core essence of mindset. Okay, so before we dive on here, let's pull out. And okay, so nobody's putting anything in the chat. So do you guys want to just, first of all, does anyone have any questions?
I was going to ask to touch on the point. Is it a case where you're either one or the other? You're either completely fixed mindset or completely growth mindset, or, you know, ways of going in between the two?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So what we find is that people tend to have a combination of growth and fixed mindsets within their life. So what's really common is we tend to have growth mindsets around the things that we're good at, and we tend to have fixed mindsets around the things that we aren't good at or we feel we aren't good at. So it's definitely not a case of one person just like rocking it and having growth mindset on all levels of life. Although I suppose maybe there's some people out there who've achieved that. But really the reality is that everyone has some aspect of a growth mindset and everyone has some aspect of a fixed mindset. But the benefit of that is that we actually, once we start wrapping our head around this, we realize that because we have experience in both, once we start to understand it and get used to kind of thinking about our experiences in that way, it's really easy to start pointing out or start recognizing where your growth mindsets are and where your fixed mindsets are, and going through the process of shifting that. So then the second part of your question, how do we actually go from one to the other? So that's a really good question. So there's a few steps to that. So the first step is becoming aware of the fact that it is a fixed mindset in the first place. So thinking back to that quote at the beginning, we can't really change until we develop an awareness of the thing that we want to change within ourselves. Yeah. And so part of the challenge of fixed mindsets is that they're often huge blind spots. And it's very hard to see what you can't see or know what you don't know about yourself. And so there's a few things that you can kind of chase to see if you can figure out where you may have a fixed mindset. So if you ever have the experience where you get this immediate reaction to something where you're just like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And probably everyone here, I know that I get that around things like, there's something in your life where you just are like, nope, I can't do that. So if you can think of what that is, maybe something will come to mind right away. Maybe you'll think back on this later and have an idea. But if you can think about what that thing is, it's then really interesting to start asking yourself a couple of questions. First one, good one is, okay, why do I think I can't do that? And just see what answers come up for you. And then sort of take one step forward and think, okay, so this is something I believe I can't do. What's possibly the belief that I have that is making me believe that I can't do this? And try to just stay super open-minded about it, because these beliefs tend to exist in our minds as like super solid things that we feel are 100% true. And what the fixed mindset approach shows us is that it's possible to have a belief about yourself that you feel is 100% true, but is not actually true.
Yeah, that's going back to those kind of core beliefs.
Yeah. So when we look at these core beliefs, you can actually label some of your core beliefs as a limiting belief. Mm-hmm. And so anything that's a limiting belief is something that you believe about yourself that is, you believe it to be true, but it's not actually true. And by believing it about yourself, you are effectively limiting your own ability to improve or progress in that specific area.
Yeah.
So I think,
does it just have to be one thing that comes to your mind whenever when
no,
you're thinking along those?
I have a whole host of things that come to mind all the time. The story that I often tell, I think you've probably heard me tell this story, Stephen, but for me, when I was first learning about this, that the big whoa moment that I had around this was that I was in first year university, one of my first big psychology classes. They were teaching growth mindset. And I realized that I had a fixed mindset around math. I basically realized that I, through again, forming an idea early on, or I never seemed to get the grades as high in math as other classes, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'd gotten to this point where by the time I had started university, I really, truly believed I wasn't good at math. I believed I was good at other things, but not math. And so it was very interesting for me it was like this kind of ground shifting moment where I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? Maybe I could be good at math if I tried. And I'd essentially stopped trying because I decided so early on in my life that it wasn't my thing. I wasn't a math person. It wasn't my forte. But that belief subsequently then had a really big impact on my life, because I then revisited essentially math, and I went back to it and realized that, yeah, if I worked hard at it, of course I could be as good at math as I was at my other subjects. And then that enabled me to progress and be successful in pursuing psychology, which has this huge math component, which I may have unconsciously kind of shied away from if I'd held on to that belief. So that's just sort of one personal perspective of how those little beliefs can kind of pop up and affect you. And yeah, we all have tons of them. I still uncover them all the time where I'm like, oh, interesting. And I've been thinking within this mindset structure for years now. And so it's definitely an ongoing process.
Yeah, I kind of understand what you're talking about. It's almost like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it kind of almost feels like an automatic reaction that you have to something. So as soon as someone suggests doing something or suggests trying something, it's almost like that automatic thing where you just go, no, that's not for me. And it's not really like a thought process where you kind of have to break it down or anything, which it probably should be.
You want to turn it into a thought process, definitely. I think that's a great point, where you want to look for those little automatic reactions where you just have an immediate no or resistance to something. And so that can be a really good way. Yeah. So once you've started to find, sort of maybe identify something that is a fixed mindset, or maybe it just could be a fixed mindset, what you want to do is look at those 4 categories in terms of failures. So within the context of whatever that fixed mindset is for you, have a look at times where you feel like you've failed in that area, and think about how you handled that failure and what your thought processes were around that. Was the failure something that you ultimately were able to learn from? Was it something that was like, that you think back and it's like still so embarrassing that you can't even really like think about it or talk about it, and you just kind of like buried it deep within your mind? So that's a little bit of a clue too, right? Like how you think about the failure around that particular topic. Think about times that you've been challenged. Think about how willing you are to challenge yourself in that area. If you're really willing to challenge yourself somewhere, you're probably leaning more towards a growth mindset. If the challenge is like, seems super scary and terrifying, and like it's just going to expose you as a fraud to everyone who knows you, then that's a hint that you might be leaning more towards fixed mindset. And then the last one is, think about how you react to people who are really good at that area. Do you look at them and go, oh, cool, amazing, like look what they're doing, I'm going to be there in 2 years, and I'm going to find out how they did it, and I'm going to do it? Or do you look at them and think, oh my God, I hate them. I'm never going to be like that. This is terrible. I'm unfollowing all of their stuff because it just makes me feel terrible about myself. Right?
I was just about to say, it's so easy to do that with social media, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, social media is obviously such a bizarre kind of twisted version of that. So I think try to think about sort of more tangible role models that you have in those areas, as opposed to social media is a little bit extra unattainable sometimes. So once you sort of start to get a sense of, okay, maybe you might have a strong sense now of, okay, I think I do have a fixed mindset about this area. What you need to do is sort of start with the belief itself. We want to try to start to rock that belief that's underlying your fixed mindset. And then once we can kind of shake that belief loose a little bit, then the changes start to become a lot easier. So I'll throw this over to the group, and don't feel like you have to. Is there anyone who has like something in their mind that they'd be interested in like working? We could talk through it right now in kind of a workshop form. Again, this stuff can be super personal, so no worries at all if not. But sometimes that can be cool. If you're really curious about it, we can kind of talk through it in real time. So keep that in the back of your mind. If anybody does want to do that, just throw up your hand and we can. Otherwise, I'll keep using my own life examples or hypothetical situations, which also work. So let's go back to the person who we were kind of talking about before, hypothetically, who has this fixed mindset around being athletic or being sporty because of all the experiences that they had. So this person now wants to get fit, wants to go to the gym, but their fixed mindset is going to be ultimately sabotaging them in all of their efforts to do this, because they're gonna go to the gym. Maybe they hire a personal trainer, but they're gonna be looking for evidence that supports their belief, which is deep down the belief is that they're not sporty. And our brain does that subconsciously. We're always kind of looking for things that back up our beliefs. And so if that person doesn't see much, maybe they won't work that hard because they don't think that they really have much chance at improving, and then they don't see a bit of progress after a couple of weeks, and then that's going to start to right away reaffirm this sense that I can improve, and that usually sometimes like leads to that person ultimately giving up, because they sort of have self-sabotaged in the sense that they have sort of created a self-fulfilling prophecy around their ability to succeed in fitness and exercise. And so what we have to do is you can talk to that person all day long and say, no, it's fine. You can do it. You can do it. You can do it. But if they don't actually believe that they can do it, then you're wasting your time. And so what we need to do with ourselves is really figure out what that underlying belief is, and then break it down. So what you need to do is find evidence that disproves that incorrect belief. So for this person, if I was talking to someone who had fitness exercise beliefs or limiting beliefs, then I would start to ask them to come up with examples of the times in their life where they've had to be physically strong in any capacity, moving, lifting. Maybe they have kids. Do they lift their kids up in the air and play with them? Examples of when these people have been active in any capacity, do they enjoy walking? Do they enjoy just getting out into the fresh air for a stroll? And so you start small and you start amassing basically a nice big pile of little bits of evidence that actually prove that you do have elements of sportiness and athleticism in your life. And what that does is, so there's two things. Just by sort of shining a light on that belief can often be like a really critical first step to sort of people realizing like, oh, that's not actually 100% true. And then once you do that and you start to amass a little pile of evidence that disproves it, then you can use that evidence to kind of come back to anytime you feel that old belief starting to kind of creep up again and start sabotaging you. And then really, because that belief is ultimately incorrect or irrational and not based in truth, then we we shake it loose by basically just disproving it. And that's best done through conversations with yourself, and potentially conversations with friends and family who know you well, who are able to also offer you examples of instances in your life where you have actually displayed the skill or talent that you believe that you don't have.
Yeah.
So I know it's a little bit deep and heavy there for our first topic. But is that, maybe everyone give me a thumbs up if you're feeling like you're kind of good with what we're talking about so far, or like a thumb sideways if you're like, what is she on about? Okay, good. That's good to see. So does anyone else have any questions about mindset before we dive on here into some more stuff? We'll kind of keep coming back to, everything's going to sort of tie into mindset today, and so hopefully that'll help reinforce these ideas. Okay, cool. All right, so no questions here yet. So I'm going to open up my slides again. Perfect. Okay, so this is a good slide actually, because this is going to give us a little bit of a visual as to what we were just talking about. So what Stephen asked there was, how do we figure out where our fixed mindsets are? And my response was that we need to start paying attention to those automatic thoughts, or those kind of sudden reactive thoughts that we have when we feel like we just can't do something. And so we call these, in psychology, we call this automatic thoughts or self-talk. You may have heard that term a bit. It's basically just self-talk is just the chatter that goes on in our heads. It's constant. We're always sort of chatting away to ourselves. And the value of sort of starting to tune into that a little bit more closely and think about what am I actually saying to myself, is that it can give you these clues as to what the underlying beliefs are behind those thoughts. So we can see in this little diagram that core beliefs directly inform these automatic thoughts and self-talk. So anything that pops into our head, anything that we sort of continuously say to ourselves, any reaction that we continuously have about something, it's always linked back to some core belief, which is informing the way that we see the world and ourselves. And then over time, these self-talk, or this accumulation of self-talk and automatic thoughts, comes together and basically forms a story that we are constantly telling ourselves about ourselves. So if we are every day feeling like, or thinking things about how we just can't do it, let's take another example here. Let's say somebody is in a work situation and they're constantly feeling like they need to be, or they're being asked to do like presentations and come up with these new ideas for the company, and they're feeling really, really overwhelmed by that. And they keep getting this reaction like, no, I can't do that. I can't come up with these new ideas. I can't put together these presentations. It's possible that person maybe has a core belief that they're not creative. And that, who knows how that came about for them, but for whatever reason, they've come around with this idea that they aren't creative. So that's informing these thoughts that they have, where they're like, no, I can't do this, I can't do this. And then that informs the sort of overall story that they have about themselves, where they aren't a creative person. They are constantly struggling with challenges around creating new content for work. They struggle around presentations. Therefore, they always feel a lack of confidence. They struggle with anxiety. All of those kind of elements of that personal story are in some parts generated by these automatic thoughts and these core beliefs. So starting to become aware of these in ourselves is a really cool process, actually. It gives you this whole level of insight to yourself that we just sort of previously often don't even think to consider. And so it's not something that happens overnight, but the more we can start to think like this, the more we can start to kind of tune into the underlying impulses and beliefs that are sort of informing our actions. Okay, so what do you guys think here? We're going to shift over to motivation here quickly. So give me a thumbs up if you think this is true, or thumbs up if you think it's false. Some people are just naturally more motivated than others. What do we think? Thumbs up for true, thumbs down for false. Ooh, a little mix there. Okay, about 50-50. Interesting. Okay, cool. So I see that, yeah, that's actually pretty common. A lot of people, the most common reaction is thumbs up, but I tend to disagree with that. And we're going to talk about why. So, oops. I really think that most of us have kind of gotten some faulty information about motivation. And I think that we get this through our culture and sort of the way that motivation is explained to us, and the way that motivation is so often described as this kind of natural phenomenon. So we often, successful people are often described as just being like incredibly motivated, but we don't really understand where they got this motivation from and why they seem to be gifted with it. And so it remains this kind of elusive concept. Meanwhile, as all of us go through our lives, we experience a constant struggle with motivation. And therefore, sometimes we get the idea about ourselves that we don't seem to be as motivated as other people, and that's a problem. So when we're talking about motivation, it's basically the process that starts, directs, and sustains activity so that certain needs are met. So this is sort of a sciencey thing, but basically what that's saying is that when at the most basic level, so say you're hungry, then your body has a need, you're hungry, and therefore your body has a natural process, which we call motivation, that inspires you to go out and find food and get your calories and fulfill that need. So at its most basic form, motivation happens without us having to do anything. It's just a natural reaction that our body generates so that we can meet a need. But the problem is that most of the things that we are trying to motivate ourselves to do in today's world are not linked to fundamental needs. And in fact, they often go kind of against what our body would consider to be a fundamental need. So for example, we want to get up at 5 in the morning to go do our new workout. In that moment, our body is going, nah, you need more sleep. What are you doing? And therefore, in that moment, our motivation, or that internal natural motivation is pushing us to actually stay in bed, even though what we want in that moment is to be motivated to get out of bed. So you can see that there's this natural conflict that occurs. So this idea of motivation, that's something that should just sort of naturally, spontaneously occur if you want something badly enough, is fundamentally incorrect. Motivation, this is a real myth, that motivation has to come before action, that if we don't want to do something before we do it, that therefore, either we shouldn't do it, or that somehow shows a failing or a lack of drive or desire to actually do that thing. So what we need to do is actually start thinking about this in reverse. And so it's not that motivation has to come before an action, but that when we're dealing with things that aren't connected to basic needs, that are a little bit more kind of complex, higher level things that we want for ourselves, that actually we need to often get moving first in order to inspire our motivation. So movement creates motivation, not the other way around. So what that looks like is, so it's 5 in the morning, you need to get up for your workout. In that moment, there's no way you're actually motivated. No part of you is like raring to jump out of your warm, cozy bed. However, you do it, you drag yourself out, and then you splash your face, maybe you have a sip of coffee, and then already you're kind of like, okay, I'm up, I'm going. And then maybe you're like not really feeling the workout, but by the time you've like logged into your group Zoom and you're chatting with people and you've warmed up, then at that stage, you probably are starting to feel pretty motivated to do this workout. But you've generated that motivation in yourself by moving first, by taking those first steps towards your goal. And then the motivation is something that kind of follows alongside. So it's really important, I think, that we flip this perception, because when we look at it the first way, we often get ourselves into situations where we feel very guilty about not having this natural, reoccurring, never-ending supply of motivation, when in reality, it's something that is incredibly inconsistent for everybody. And it's about figuring out how to get that movement happening, which is more related to habit building, which is something we're going to touch on here in a little bit. So when we're thinking about motivation itself, it is still useful to have a sort of basic understanding of how it works. So motivation always exists on a spectrum, from no motivation, complete absence of, all the way up to what we call intrinsic motivation, which is a sort of internal motivation. And it's when you're doing something purely for like the sheer joy and pleasure and fulfillment of that activity. So everyone can think of something that they just like really love to do purely for the sake of doing it. You're not being rewarded in any, no one's giving you a reward for doing it. You're not avoiding a punishment. You're just doing it for the sheer enjoyment. So that's a really lovely experience, and everyone has things that they are intrinsically motivated to do. But in reality, most of us kind of flow through the spectrum, and we exist in what is in the middle here, which is extrinsic or external motivation, which is where we are actually motivated to do something either because we're going to gain a reward from doing it, or we're going to avoid a punishment. So if we think about exercise, usually falls into this category. And so the reward is better health, stronger body, more flexibility and mobility, looking better, feeling better in our own skin. All of those things are essentially external rewards. Now, there's nothing wrong with that at all. And that's like a perfectly acceptable and good form of motivation. And so once again, sometimes I think people feel like they should always be in that intrinsic or internal area of motivation where you really just love doing something. But in reality, we have to acknowledge that we're always on a spectrum. We're going to experience moments of that wonderful sort of pure internal motivation, but most of the time we're going to be existing in the space in between where we are using sort of the lure of rewards or the sort of running away from the things that we don't want as a source of motivation. And at the end of the day, what we really want is to start linking into building an identity around the thing that we want to accomplish. So again, linking it into fitness and exercise, we want to start figuring out how to be the type of person who values exercise. How do we become the type of person who is willing to commit time regularly to our fitness and health? What does that person think? What does that person believe? What does that version of myself really, value and prioritize? And when we can build that into our identity, a really fundamental shift happens. We go from being someone who is kind of bad at fitness and exercise, who's just trying to improve, to someone who fundamentally values the process of a fitness and exercise journey, sees where they are, believes that they can get where they want to go with with effort and time. Okay, so linking in that growth mindset, and is willing to just take the next step on the journey and take the next step on the journey because that's who they are and that's their identity and that's how they want to move through life. And that is a really cool, stable place to be with motivation. It allows us to navigate the kind of natural ups and downs that we feel day to day. So a really cool exercise that you guys can sort of take away from this, if you like, which links in mindset and some identity stuff, is I call this person A versus person B. Okay, so you can take a little note here if you like. So person A is going to be the growth mindset version of yourself. Okay, so imagine your kind of ideal growth mindset self. How does that person confront let's say the process of fitness and exercise? How does that person start their day? How does that person feel and react and think about the process of engaging with health and exercise? The more detailed you can get with this, the better. So jot down a few notes there, and you can always expand on this at a later time. So what you want is to start to get this sort of picture in your mind, a pretty well-rounded picture of your mind of what that version of yourself is like. And it should be linked to as much reality as possible. So think about examples of times that you have responded really well with a growth mindset, and you have really felt that experience. So then person B is going to be the fixed mindset version of yourself. So this is the version of yourself, and it exists within all of us, where we don't quite live up to our potential. We give in to the fear. We give into our ego a little bit, trying to protect us. This part of us doesn't want to take risks because it's a little bit scary, and it doesn't want to expose ourselves to potential criticism or ridicule, or again, that big scary failure. This side of us avoids failure at all costs because it is essentially just an embarrassing experience that highlights what, to everyone else, what we're not good at. So this version of ourselves is very risk adverse and reacts according to that. It's very fear driven and ego protection driven. So just think about what that version of yourself is for you, and kind of what scenarios come to mind when you think about being that version of yourself. So the reality is that with everyone, we all have these two versions of ourselves that exist within us. Even within a single day, we can flip from our growth mindset version to our fixed mindset version. So by labeling them, person A, person B, and sometimes it's fun to give them little names, like person A, I don't know, you could call her Sally, and then person B could be Margaret, and then they're your little sub ego, sub personalities. And then what I want you to do is really build out this idea of clearly who you are in these two different versions of yourself, and then start to notice who's showing up. Start to notice if it's Sally or Margaret on any given day or in any given hour, who is showing up and influencing your behaviors and reactions. And then the next step is to start trying to consciously choose to be Sally and not Margaret in the situations when Margaret's trying to show up. I hope I haven't just confused you now with all these names. But in that sense, we can start to connect into the identity that we want to build around a growth mindset, that growth mindset version of ourselves, and consciously kind of pull ourselves back to that growth mindset version. All of this stuff anchors in the idea that we can always choose our reaction to any given situation. And we have a choice. We always have a choice to be the growth mindset version of ourselves or the fixed mindset version. We often get pulled into the fixed mindset because of fear, because of our beliefs, and because of sort of lack of self-awareness. And so we're just reacting instead of taking a moment to step back and think and choose a reaction. So it's a really important difference. So just to wrap up motivation, I just really want to bring this home here, where I would love for you guys to start thinking about how you can let go of the guilt that you may have around motivation. And I know that I've had a ton of guilt around motivation in my life. And I often find this with people, that people can really resonate with this feeling of just being so guilty sometimes that you don't want to do the thing that you feel you should want to do. For me, this is very much linked to my experience. I was an equestrian athlete for years. And I absolutely loved it. It was my whole life, very intrinsically motivated in many ways to be riding horses because I absolutely loved it. But still, there were many mornings where no part of me wanted to get up at 5 and muck out 10 stables and ride 3 horses and then go to work. There was many days where I was just like, oh my God, no. But I was always so incredibly guilty about that. And I always felt like maybe I didn't deserve the success that I wanted because I didn't have this natural 100% pure driven motivation every single morning to do the hard work that was involved. And so I think it's really, really key to realize that it's not about motivation at the end of the day. It's useful to understand it, to understand how it works, and have sort of a deeper awareness of it. But at the end of the day, it's about habit building. which we're going to dive into next after our next little question break here. And I would love for all of you guys to try and let go of that guilt, because at the end of the day, the guilt itself can become very demotivating. If we constantly feel guilty about not being motivated in a specific area, then our natural sort of sense of internal self-protection is going to make it more likely that we're going to stop doing that activity so that we can stop experiencing the guilt of not being motivated to do it. And so if we can drop the guilt, that's a really cool first step towards just actually achieving more in that area. Okay, so before we dive into habits here, let's open up again for questions. So any motivation questions or anything that's come up about mindset in the meantime there? No questions, bad question. Just fire it out there.
No, I was just going to say that I love that whole portion of your work there as well, talking about the identity and stuff. And the main thing is, you know, like taking that time to step away and like think of before you act, or you know, choosing to go and do something. Just have that wee thought process going on before you go to do something. I love it.
Yeah, and it's hard to do. It takes a lot of practice. And that in itself is it's cool to think about that as a new habit to build, so that you actually want to get into the habit of always just taking a beat and thinking about how you're going to react to something. Or sometimes what happens is we have our initial reaction, but then that we take that moment to stop, realize that we've had a certain reaction, and then maybe choose to proceed with a different reaction. Yeah. So there's different ways that can pan out. And it's definitely an ongoing process of getting used to first of all, thinking about your reactions as something that we have more control over. And then secondly, actually taking that moment to choose. Yeah. Cool. Okay, well, if we're all good, then I'm going to dive on in here into habit change as our last little section here. Okay, give me 2 seconds. Okay, so for a long time, there's been a lot of focus on motivation and figuring out what it is, and I'm tapping it and trying to make it accessible to everyone, because we've seen it, as I said before, as this kind of the sort of secret ingredient to success. You know, there's these people out there who seem to just be so motivated all the time, and we've had this real desire to understand what's happening there. So the cool thing is that through all that research over the years, what was really uncovered was that it's not so much about motivation, as I just explained. It's not so much about these successful people somehow having this higher than average source of motivation. What they found is that really these successful people had just established some really strong habits. So I really like this image for habits, because for me, this kind of represents what our brain looks like in terms of all the little connections that exist, that exist between our actual brain cells, our brain neurons, that make up who we are and make up our reactions and thoughts on a day-to-day basis. And so if you look at this image here, and you imagine that each of these kind of links or pathways, lines, represents a series of actions or a series of thoughts or a series of feelings that your body is so used to experiencing, that you've built up so much familiarity with over the years. You've done it over and over again so many times that this pathway in your brain is like a supercharged highway. It's got like 4 lanes. It is like super, super well developed. And so your brain tends to just always send you down this pathway, this really strong developed highway. It's not going to send you down the weird little like dinky Irish back road. It's going to send you down the like super well established Canadian highway. I like to compare our 2 countries' road system, because that's just the most obvious way to go. It's like a clean, clear, well-established route. So this is essentially a habit. It's something that it's an action or a thought or a behavior or a feeling that your brain defaults to because it's so practiced and established. And this helps us. There's a reason our brain does this. It's because if we had to think at depth about all the small choices and feelings and thoughts that we have over the course of a day, we'd be completely overwhelmed. We wouldn't, we'd barely be able to function, let alone get on with the, higher processes of evolution and all that. And so the system behind habit formation allows us to operate at a really high level. It means that we don't need to think about everything that we're doing. So that's good. But where this system kind of hijacks us is that inadvertently we can form habits that actually aren't helpful to us, specifically around the way that we think and feel about ourselves. And then because our brain is so good at creating these habit systems, they're very, very hard to change and break. And so often when we try to do something differently and we ultimately don't succeed, like we don't manage to make that change, again, it's not that we didn't have enough willpower or we didn't try hard enough. It's often that our old habits are so strong and so powerful that they literally pull us back into our routine way of doing things. So we tend to think about habits as like the side of the bed that we get up on, the order that we brush our teeth in the morning or wash our face, all those things. So what I want to really bring home here is that in the same way that those little actions are habits, so too are the way that we think and feel and react. And that's where it becomes really sort of crucial in psychology that we become aware of habits, how they're influencing us, and then learn how to actually go about changing them in a way that really works. So we're going to leave motivation behind for now, and we're going to focus in on building these new habits. So habit change in itself is, it's a whole process, and there's a lot of really cool books on this right now. It's kind of a real hot topic in the world right now. I found if you go on Pinterest, it's hilarious. It's like every pin now is like 5 habits to do this, 4 habits to do this, 10 habits to do this. So it's like a real buzzword. Everybody's jumping on the habit bandwagon. But there's a reason for that. It's because, the research really is showing that this is a really cool way that we can create like real lasting change. And it's a better way of thinking about changing behavior than just trying to do it through sheer willpower. Okay, so first step to habit change is that awareness. Again, we can't change something if we don't know what it is that we're trying to change. So we need to be pretty clear on what that new habit is that we want for ourselves. Now, when I say clear, I mean like super clear. So I want you guys to all think about a new habit that you really would love to form, a new behavior, a new thing that you would love to do, and just kind of hold that in your mind for a second. And then jot down how would you actually feel once that habit is dialed, once that new behavior is established. How are you going to feel? And then I want you to jot down, what does your life look like now that this new habit is established? What's changed? And then go ahead and jot down what you've maybe had to let go of in order for that new habit to be established. What did you have to let go of? And then lastly, I want you to write down why you did all this. Why is this important to you? Why is this habit, is this new habit something that you want? So we often think about these things that we want, these new habits that we want to form, and we set goals to attain them. Say, excuse me, say, I say, okay, I want to start getting up at 6 o'clock every morning. That's the new habit I want to form. And I say, okay, I'm going to do that by setting my alarm clock for 5:45 every morning. But we often don't go much deeper than that. we don't take the time to think through how our life's going to be different as a result. The actual ways we're going to feel different about ourselves, the things that we have to really fundamentally give up or change in order to get that new habit. And as the most important, the last thing, why it actually is that we want this. And with that why, it's important to try and go a little bit deeper than just so that I can get up earlier in the morning. Okay, that's an answer, that's a why. But what I'm really trying to get at here is, why is it really important to you? How is it going to change your life? Why is it worth the effort to you? Why is it worth you giving up an extra hour of sleep every day? What's the actual underlying reason? And so by asking yourself, I'm just gonna grab some water here. I find when I talk for these things and too long, I just start like choking on my own words. So you want to really focus in on why that is going to make a big difference for you in your life. And asking yourself a couple of times can be kind of cool. And so you might get a first answer to the why. And then you might want to say, okay, cool, that's a good reason, but why else? Why else is this important to me? Let's see what your second answer is. And then I like to go for the third one then, okay, so those two things are good reasons. Why else is this important to me? And so this can be a really useful exercise because it forces you to dig deep and come up. Sometimes you come up with answers that you didn't even realize were the answer. But by forcing yourself to think a little bit longer and deeper about it, we can come up with the real sort of driving. And sometimes the why is interesting and it's not the why that you thought. And that can lead to two outcomes. It can either change your perspective on the habit change itself. Maybe it's going to change your mind about whether or not that is a habit that you want to pursue, or it's going to sort of deepen and strengthen your own understanding of yourself in that in that area. Okay, so now that we've established a deeper level of awareness, the next thing is sheer repetition. So if you think about that strong, super established highway in your brain versus the little windy back road, what you're trying to do in your brain is shut down that highway and reinforce and strengthen and widen that little rickety back road. So the highway is the old behavior, the old habit. The little windy rickety back road is your new behavior. And so it takes time and effort. You have to constantly choose the back road over that nice, easy highway over and over and over again until that back road starts to become the new highway. And so we used to think that this took about 21 days. Unfortunately, this has now been completely disproven. And we know that it actually takes a minimum of probably 3 months, up to even as long as a year, to really go to the point where what was once the old back road is now your new established highway that you choose every time. So that's where the dedication comes in. We have to stick with it. And we have to stick with it for sometimes a long time. And so wrapped up in the dedication is also an ability or taking the step to plan for setbacks. So with any behavior change, any habit change, there's no way that we're going to do it perfectly from day one. Even if we take the time to really establish our clarity and awareness of what it is and why we're doing it, and we really dedicate to that or commit to the repetition, there's always going to be days where life hijacks us, things come up, and for whatever reason, we take the old path instead of the new one that we're trying to forge. So there's a little exercise that we can do to kind of get ahead of that. And so when we're thinking about that, so focus in on that habit change that you outlined before. And I want you to write down 3 things that you would be willing to bet money on are going to derail your attempt to derail your ability or your attempt to make that change. So what are 3 things that you're pretty sure are going to get in your way and make that process difficult? 3 things that are going to be really challenging, that are going to be a pain in the butt, and essentially try to derail this process. So now that we have those 3 things outlined, I want you to come up with a little strategy for how you're going to solve each of those 3 future problems for yourself. So look at the first one and think, okay, if I know that's something that's going to create a challenge for me, what action or decision or process can I set in place today that's going to reduce the risk of that thing creating a problem for me down the road? Or maybe it still creates a bit of a problem, but the problem isn't, or the impact of that problem isn't as significant because of something that you've chosen to do today that's going to sort of help you be one step ahead in that scenario. So we call this little process implementation intentions. And it can be helpful to think about a little structure. So you can think of filling in the blanks in a little sentence that goes like this. When blank happens, I will do blank. So when blank happens, I will do blank. And essentially, you're just setting the intention ahead of time as to how you're going to deal with these inevitable setbacks. But the really cool thing about it is that when inevitably that situation does arise, or a situation that's similar to it, you already have this little plan in your head. And so often you are able to effectively totally circumnavigate that issue. If you can't fully circumnavigate it, you handle it 1,000 times better than you would have otherwise, because you've already sort of put a little bit of thought into the different ways it could work out. And it ultimately ends up being much less of an issue. And there's also this cool effect too, where instead of it being this like total like blindsiding, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. When it does happen, you kind of go, oh, haha, yes, hello situation that I totally predicted. And it has this effect of not being as impactful or negative or sort of catastrophic as a situation as it could have been. Okay, so that's my little drive-by approach to habit change. And again, I do encourage you guys, if you're interested in this, there's a lot of great books to read because there's more steps. There's a more detailed way that you can kind of break all this down. We could potentially come back to this in future talks, or if any of you are interested in like tackling this one-on-one with me, that's something I do all the time with people, like really break down these processes and help them get in there and change some particularly tricky habits. But hopefully that gives you a starter sense of how that all works. So when we're looking at, basically looking at our behavior and our thoughts from the perspective of habits, it allows us to see how often just the feelings that we have around change being really difficult are rooted in the fact that it is difficult, that habits are powerful things that direct our behavior. And so, you're not alone in that feeling that change is difficult. It's not just difficult for you, like it's difficult for everybody. And it's because of these habits. And so I find it personally really kind of cool and interesting and enlightening to look at change, managing change from that perspective, because I feel like it gives us a real tangible way to approach the process of change, where we have a lot more understanding and control over what's actually happening, and therefore we can have a much better chance of getting the results that we want, instead of it being something where it feels really hard and we don't really understand why. So when we're thinking about taking those really important steps where we sort of know what we want to do, and we say we have all the information around a habit change that we want. So say we want to start exercising more, and we know all the information around that. We know the exercises, we know what we'd have to do to make that happen. Where the real challenge comes in is in the implementation of that. And that's where the habits are sort of hijacking or sabotaging us, because in order to take that step from just knowing and having a sense in your mind about something you want to change, and actually applying it and implementing it and tangibly making that behavior change, you have to tackle those old habits and start building new ones. And it's a lot of work, but it's also incredibly rewarding, and it can be a really cool experience to engage in, because once you kind of tackle your first habit and you get that first one broken and the new habit ingrained, then you're like, yes, I can do this. And it actually becomes a much more streamlined process in my experience, once you kind of have that fundamental understanding and confidence in yourself that it is something that you can do. Cool. Okay, so I think, what else do I have here? Oh yeah, so this we'll save that for the very end there. Okay, I'm gonna pull out of my screen share here, and we'll just see if anyone has any questions around habit change before we go to our final wrap up.
Can I ask a question?
Hello.
Hello. I think it's basically about rest and recovery. And what would you have to say about that when you're talking about trying to change habits? I guess what I'm immediately thinking is that I would have to be careful that I factor in, like, that I'm trying to make those changes in a manageable way. And I guess like it's like having to factor in rest and recovery with anything that you're doing. And how do you do that rather than whenever what you're looking to do is build the habits and be consistent, whether you're motivated to do it or not? What would you say about how to make sure that you're doing it in a manageable way without lacking consistency, I guess?
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, like how do you account for that, like mental rest and recovery as
because say if we're having stuff about self-awareness and development and stuff in work, a word that I hear a lot at the moment is resilience, and it really gets my goat, because it's a word that you can use quite harmfully very easily. Because if you just tell somebody that it's great to have resilience, if somebody's already quite self-critical, you're potentially just telling them to be a little bit harder on themselves. So how do you tell the difference? I guess
that's a great question. I 100% agree with you. I get super annoyed about how the way that resilience is thrown around these days as well, because it's not explained properly, and you totally hit the nail on the head there, where people are just told that they do better if they were more resilient, and all that does is it makes people feel like they're not resilient enough, and that's a problem, and that's somehow that they're lacking. So I think we can actually tie that into to answer your question, where all of this stuff, all of this attempt to kind of have more awareness and a little bit more sort of control over thinking and thoughts and reactions, all needs to be taken within the context of being, first of all, being patient and kind with yourself. That's what I always tell people, is that there's no way to somehow, you could study psychology your entire life, but there's no way to somehow train yourself to be in a perfect mindset 100% of the time, to be nailing your habits and somehow firing at 110% all the time. At the end of the day, everybody is human. And as a part of that, we all experience continuous little setbacks. We're triggered by all sorts of things that we're aware of, things that we're not aware of. We have, things happen in our lives that are challenging. And so I think it's really important to see resilience for what it is, which is the ability to always shift and adapt in reaction to the events, potentially negative or challenging events in your life, and figure out how to learn and change in a way that allows you to progress. So it's not about somehow acquiring enough mental strength that you can just like bulldoze your way through tough times and not feel the ramifications of that. So that for me is a really key difference. There's no secret knowledge or book or bit of information under the sun that is going to allow you to somehow not feel or experience the tough times or the challenge of things. And I think that the real power comes with acknowledging that and not holding yourself to some kind of bizarre standard where you shouldn't be feeling those things. and not using that as a measuring stick of how well you're doing mentally or how well you're doing psychologically. It's always about how you choose to react and what you can figure out how to take away and learn. And that in itself is a process each time. And it's about, and you learn the lesson by experiencing the situation, not by somehow toughening up and not experiencing the emotions. So I haven't gotten too off track here. Is that good? Yeah. So basically the rest and the recovery is mentally is absolutely important. Don't hold yourself to a crazy standard. This type of change is fatiguing on your brain in the same way that working out and working new muscles in your body is fatiguing. And so it's very important to build in that rest. Give yourself a day off from your habit change once a week. Give yourself a day where you can just relax and not hold yourself to a specific schedule. Engage in activities that you enjoy as much as possible. There's lots of different ways that we can rest and recover our brain by linking in with relaxation, enjoyment, time with others. Connection with others is a big one. Even just being outside can be a real nice rest and recharge for our brains. But yeah, don't feel like in order to be successful with this stuff, that you need to somehow be mentally on the ball every second of your life. Yeah, I think it's a really good point, because a lot of the time, like I said, with that resilience stuff, it's kind of mislabeled.
Yeah, that distinction is really helpful.
Good. Yeah. And by all means, please spread that around. If you hear people talking about resilience, be like, actually, I was just talking with a sports psychologist and she says, because I think it's really important that we sort of start to challenge that weird cultural assumption that we're building around resilience, because it's just not helpful. And weirdly, the COVID-19 thing has almost accelerated that, because now everyone's we have to be resilient to our changing times and everyone just needs to be resilient. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, I'm not resilient enough. Panic. So yeah, sometimes we just cause more problems. Cool. Okay, so if there's sorry, do you have a question there, Stephen?
No, I was just going to say, I noted down that whole, when something happens, I will do something. I think that's a whole thing. You can kind of almost tie that, just in my head. I've been talking to Ida a couple of times about, I want to start running and stuff. And one of the problems that I had noted down was having sore legs or feeling too tired and stuff. But having that kind of sentence, almost like a rule of going, if you have sore legs, take your rest or whatever, you got to recover and allow yourself to not beat yourself up about not doing the habit. As long as you have some sort of a plan behind what you're going to do when those situations occur.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really key thing. We often feel like we should beat ourselves up for somehow not sticking to our schedules and our plans. It ties into that sense of guilt that I was talking about not being motivated and again, holding ourselves to these really high standards. But all that we do when we engage in that kind of self-criticism is we just tire ourselves out mentally. And we just pull ourselves back into those old belief systems that we're trying to break out of and waste a lot of time and energy and emotion. So the more that we can sort of just give ourselves a break and be kind to ourselves and acknowledge, all the ways that you are doing really well, the better. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with this, but my favorite way to do that when you're in the process of beating yourself up to kind of flip that switch is to engage in a really tiny little gratitude exercise. Just try to rattle off 3 things that you're really grateful for in your head. And I actually find it to be astonishing how effective that can be to just kind of jolt you out of that self-flagellation cycle that we all love to engage in. It's a symptom of high performing people. We all love to beat ourselves up.
Yeah, and it puts you into that kind of downward spiral where you just keep going and going and going, and then the next thing you're not doing anything, you're not taking any action towards your goals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. One thing that's really interesting that comes up a lot with that kind of downward spiral is that it can sometimes feel weirdly good to engage in that kind of self-beating up downward spiral thinking. In the short term, it's like weirdly like comforting sometimes, or it feels like you should be doing it, and that can be a very interesting thing to notice. And again, that is very much tied into just the power of the habits of the way that we're used to thinking about things, and just the familiarity of it being comforting.
Yeah, I was going to maybe even suggest that it could be the linking back to your core beliefs, and almost like your being going, your brain saying, I told you so, you know, that.
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
And our brain loves, like I said earlier, our brain is very good at finding evidence to support its own beliefs. So there's a great quote I threw up on the Instagram there a while ago that I found. I think it's your life. Your life doesn't shape your beliefs shape your life. That's it. Yeah. So it's not that your life shapes the things that you believe. Your beliefs, it works the other way, that your beliefs actually shape the experience of your life. And I love that, because it really ties up in a nutshell like the power of these beliefs and how much they influence us on a day-to-day.
Yeah. You'll avoid the things that you believe that you're not so good at, so that kind of shapes what way your life's going to go.
Yeah. Which is mental. Like I find it fascinating to dive into that with people, because everybody has things that they avoid because they believe they're not good at them. And that has such interesting ripple effects. And then it can be really, really cool to see somebody realize that they have the potential to actually be good at something that they've wanted to be good at for a long time, and then to go out and actually accomplish that thing. And it's just so interesting. And it's like that weird cliche that, you hear it like, oh, the only thing holding you back is yourself, and everybody hears that and rolls their eyes. But there's a kernel of truth in that, where we are at the end of the day in charge of our reactions and responses. And that's why I love the fixed versus growth mindset framework, because it's just such a clear way of understanding how the way that we're reacting, the way that we're interpreting an event ultimately impacts our lives in huge ways sometimes.
Yeah. I love James Clear's book, The Atomic Habits. And he kind of talks about it, like people who may not believe that, like the current habits, are their habits at the minute determines where they are now, until you kind of change them. And then you realize that it just brings it down a completely different path.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be, you don't know in a way like where those new habits are going to take you in terms of what the next level of habits you might be able to acquire from there. So it's a real journey of kind of personal development, which is cool. Yeah, it's exciting. Cool. Does anyone else have any burning questions? I bet you there's at least one out there. I will say too, I'll throw up a slide here in a minute that has my email on it. So if any of you are feeling like you really don't want to bring a question to the whole group, but you would really like to ask me something, please feel free to email me, and I'll get back to you with an answer as best I can. So I'll fire that off in a second. Okay, so I have one final little exercise for you guys quickly. I know we're almost out of time here. Just to help you wrap up and kind of embed this habit change stuff a little more. So I want you to think back over what we all just talked about there, and think about what were the 3 things that really stood out for you. So kind of 3 takeaway points that you were like, okay, that's something either that piqued your curiosity, you really want to learn more about it, or it's something that you kind of feel like you have a handle on and you want to start implementing it, or it's a change in the way that you want to think about yourself or start thinking. So really zero in on those 3 things. And then once you have those 3 things, next thing is to write down very specifically when you're going to start these new actions. So when are you going to start researching this new thing that you want to learn more about? When are you going, how are you going to do that? When are you going to start this new behavior? When are you going to start thinking differently? Very specifically, is it later tonight? Is it tomorrow morning? Whenever it is for you. So what this step does is it makes your intention around this a little bit more tangible. It's very easy to participate in something like this, and you get a bunch of information thrown at you, and our kind of natural reaction is to take it all in and potentially be interested and engaged by certain aspects of it. But then, we go back and we get sucked into the routine of our day, and but before you know it, you haven't thought about it again for a week, and then it gets lost, and potentially the opportunity to implement some change as a result of that learning is then lost. So I would really recommend actually taking note of these 3 questions, and anytime you guys attend any kind of informational talk or session or anything in the future, just by going through these 3 steps afterwards can really help you get to the point where you're really implementing those takeaways right away in a way that's super tangible. Okay, so the last step is accountability. And just by sharing the intention that you have to make a change or think about something differently, can have a huge effect on our kind of the mental attention that we give to it and the likelihood that we will follow through. So anyone who wants to can maybe just quickly take their mic off one at a time and just let the group know what their 3 points were. You don't have to say when you're going to start them, but just let them know what the 3 points were. If that's horrifying and you don't want to do that, then you can decline and tell your spouse or your friend or something like that, or message them to Stephen. But I do encourage, I'd love to hear from you guys. I always love to hear what people's takeaways are. So I promise I will bite if anybody wants to jump on and share. So I'm going to just stop sharing here. Stephen, do you want to do yours? I'll throw you under the bus.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole idea, I'm fascinated with the whole idea of like limiting beliefs and core beliefs and your identity, and how that kind of shapes your identity. For a long time, like I was very, very heavily overweight and stuff, and it was always in my head that I was just supposed to be a big guy, or like I have family members who are holding a lot of weight, so that's just the way we are. And it wasn't actually until starting the gym and exercise and stuff that I noticed that that just wasn't the case. I love the when something happens, I will do something. So I'm going to have to really go through that and start implementing it with myself, because it's very easy to kind of skip over that. You're used to being the point of accountability rather than having, be accountable to somebody. So I am going to have to start messaging Ida to get my ass out running again.
Perfect.
Yeah,
it's really good to have an accountability buddy.
yeah
Totally.
The person A and person B thing again, with the whole identity idea, like who you want to be or who you feel that you're being at the moment, and noticing those kind of trends, and seeing the differences and even the habits like you want to talk about. So person A, if you're talking about your fixed mindset person there, what are the habits that person have? And then your person B, okay, I want to be a more growth mindseted person. What are the habits and what are the ideas that surround that person's identity? What do they believe about themselves, and how can I start implementing that in my own life or whatever?
Awesome.
Yeah,
that's one of my favorites as well.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Anyone else want to share with the group what their takeaways are? Wish I could give you chocolate as a reward or something, but I can't. Imaginary chocolate. This is why real life is better.
Virtual high fives and fist bumps and stuff.
I don't really have 3 things as such, but I think like a big part of today, like over the last 3 months, I've sort of like I've had a pretty big challenge, and this is something I've actually been working on. So like some of what you've went over today kind of just reiterates where I kind of came from. So like back at the start of March, and this is like a work related situation, but I fully believe that what happened, that I was meant to like experience that, because it's made me, now I feel like, you know, a much stronger person. So, and now I feel like, you know, I'm ready to go back, and there's going to be a lot of things where I'm going to go, okay, you know, there's certain things that I'm implementing now, and I have like this whole intention of like, when I go back to work, this is going to be my intention. You know, there's like, so it's all sort of incorporated what I've been working on sort of over the last 3 months. So it's quite interesting just to kind of, I don't know, it's more like that reassurance. You know, I have been working on it with like someone else, but I do fully believe that it's the experience. You know, it's like, well, actually, I'm supposed to experience that. And it's basically like, I fully believe that even though it was like awful, you know, there's so many positives that I can actually take from it. I do think that it actually was one of those ones where it was supposed to, it kind of was like supposed to happen, because now I feel like I'm actually coming out a much stronger person, and I have actually a lot more like kind of resources, a lot more kind of like control mechanisms in place. So now I just need to make sure that I actually, everything that I say, I like implement. You know, so it's quite interesting just to kind of get it all reiterated again.
Good. I'm really pleased that worked out that way as a little summary of all the things you've been thinking about. That's fantastic. And you're absolutely right. The often we the difficult situation itself kind of like acts as a catalyst to really accelerate our growth. And sometimes you don't see that till after the fact. But yeah, often you look back at these things and realize like, wow, you know, I wouldn't be where I was today if it wasn't for that difficult situation. So yeah, really good job reframing that. Thanks for sharing. Anybody else want to fire out their takeaways?
Yeah, I'll jump on as well, sure.
Cheers.
No problem. I had actually started a little routine of getting up between 5 and 5:30 a.m. a few weeks ago. And I really like the idea of finding out why, like going down to that third or second or whatever, how far you want to go, as to why, because I feel like that really kind of, it puts it into better way of why I was doing it, which I really, really like. So I'm going to actually take that away for a few things. And also the, like identifying 3 ways that I could fail at this year, and 3 ways of solving that failure. So there's a few days last week where I didn't do it. And there's ways I just kind of talked myself out of doing it. And I could have, if I had the solutions beforehand, I could have probably talked myself back into doing it. But I jumped back in this week and done it. So I'm happy to kind of fail a little bit and then come back to it, which was okay. And then one of the things I actually really liked, and I'm probably going to take this more into the work side of things, is the fixed mindset and identifying if you have a fixed mindset. Because there's a few things where I'm like, oh, I just don't like that there, or I'm not good at it, so I'm not going to do it. But I like the idea of identifying those and the failures and challenges, and looking at other people as well and saying, can I identify those areas and then kind of move more towards a growth mindset with that.
Awesome. Wow, awesome. Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, and I think it's a really good point, Jean, that the fixed mindset has, yeah, like don't feel like you only need to look at it in one area of your life. You know, bringing that into work, bringing that into relationships can be super interesting too. Like we can have interesting fixed mindsets around, you know, relationships with our families or our partners, friends. The opportunities for kind of exploration through that lens or that perspective of mindset is really wide. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing, guys, who you did, and for those who didn't, just go ahead and find somebody to talk to about it. It'll make a huge difference in terms of that accountability, whether it's your friend or a parent or a coach. Just sharing those intentions will definitely help kind of solidify them in the long run.
Do you want to put up the details you're talking about, where people can find you and stuff on social media or email or whatever, just in case anyone wants to send an email or a message to you?
Absolutely.
And I know that you're developing a course at the moment as well, so just in case anyone would be interested in that, do you want to talk a wee bit about that?
So the course itself is specifically, this first one is going to be designed specifically for personal trainers, and then there's going to be some follow-up ones for sort of the average athlete or the average person just seeking to implement this stuff in their daily lives. So I'll sort of talk you through the structure of how the personal trainer one's going to work, and then there'll be a similar structure rolled out for the other ones. So it's going to be delivered over 3 weeks. And so what I've done is I've really structured it to kind of incorporate all of this habit change knowledge that we know now. We know that when you just digest a bunch of information over a couple of days all at once, that it's very hard to take that information forward. So we're shifting the sort of traditional structure, and it's going to be rolled out over 3 weeks, where each sort of section becomes available to you on each day over the 3 weeks, with a break on the weekends. You don't have to do that content on the one day, but it's available to you in that structure. And then as things become available, they stay available, and you're able to go back to it or revisit or maybe do a couple on one day if you didn't have time on the day before, etc. But what that does is it gives you the information in sort of 20-minute digestible sections, and allows you to take the time to sort of digest that before moving on to the next, and the information builds on itself. By working on it over a 3-week period, it never gets overwhelming, and then you also kind of get to actually implement that habit train structure throughout the progress or the process of the course itself. And what I'm going to do for the first kind of iterations of that course is that the first group of people, so for the personal training one, say we get 20 to 30 people to sign up for the first round, that all those people are going to go through that course together in the same time frame. And that there'll be a group coaching call on the Saturdays. So 3 sessions on each Saturday of each of the 3 weeks, where included in the course, where we get to really talk and discuss and apply all the principles that have been taught in real time to that person's personal experience or of their PTing or their clients, etc. So I think that's going to be really fun. And what else can I tell you? I suppose for those of you who are PTs, the course itself is going to start out with applying all of this, a little bit of what we talked about today, but sort of much more in depth then about how to really get in there and address your own beliefs and mindsets around yourself as a person, a personal trainer, around your business, gaining confidence around interactions with your clients, focusing in on communication skills around challenging situations with clients. And then the second half is then how do we teach all this stuff to our clients in a way that makes really impactful change for them. So how to coach a growth mindset, how to coach someone's motivation, how to guide someone through an identity shift, through a mindset shift, how to help them see themselves in a new light where they can really understand their potential, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's in a nutshell. So there's going to be more information coming out about that. So if you do follow me on Instagram, or you can sign up to my newsletter on my website if you like, or if you are associated with Black Box at all, they're going to be helping me launch more information about the course. So there'll be more information coming down the line through that. So that's my little spiel there, but I'm super excited about it. It's coming together really well, and I think it's going to be hopefully a really great experience for anyone who wants to give it a try.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the information being put out there. I'm for sure going to be checking that out.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, guys. It's been so lovely to meet you all virtually. I really miss in live sessions where you get to meet people and shake their hands and and have a chat, but hopefully we'll be back doing that one of these days.
Yeah, well, maybe all sitting in Black Box on a freezing cold night.
Yeah.
all together.
Exactly. Next February.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Annika, for everything today. There's definitely a lot for people to get out of this and stuff. And again, it's recorded and stuff, so we'll be able to send that on to anyone who wasn't able to make it today. So just in case anyone messages through who you didn't see on the call, it could be coming from someone who's seeing this at a later date. Okay.
No worries. No, it's been a
thank you
pleasure.
very much. Thank you very much indeed.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, my pleasure. Hopefully we'll see you all again sometime. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.